You expected me to talk about UI, the real reason everyone's here. It's such a good point, isn't it? I didn't even write it, someone else did. Prioritizing players throughout development. So before I start, I have to remind you to please be mindful of your mobile phone usage during the talk, and also remember to give some feedback afterwards. You'll be emailed like a quick form. So yeah, cool. My name is Chloe. I'm a UX designer at Ubisoft Reflections. I also call myself a DEI paladin, which is basically just fancy nerd speak to say that I strive to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion in all the work that I do. And I also do some illustrations sometimes, which may pop up throughout the talk. So, a little bit about me to help you form a lens to view the next 45 minutes through. So, my education is in computer science, where I was originally on an AI specialism in my degree, but I found that I was increasingly interested more in the human aspects of computer science. I interned at a company called Createch. You can see a little picture here of a weird arm robot. So Createch makes robotic solutions for the nuclear industry, which sounds big and intimidating. It sort of is. It's very cool. They do cool stuff. And I was lucky enough to intern there. Again, I started off doing more software stuff, but I tried to bring in some of what I'd learned about human-computer interaction from my degree to the work that they were doing. A career highlight for me was last year when I spoke at the Game UX Summit about a research project I've done at university about the design of educational games for autistic children. And now, as I said, I'm at Ubisoft Reflections. I've been there 2 years. I'm part of a small UX team working on a new IP project, and we're also the first dedicated UX team at the studio. So we're 2 years into trying to establish and integrate ourselves into the AAA company. So this talk isn't going to focus on a specific post-mortem of a certain project in any of these photos. It's about UX as a philosophy and an approach to creativity, to continuous improvement and crafting meaningful experiences for people. I've dabbled in UX in academia, in innovative industry tech at a small company, and in games at a big company, and this is what I've learned. So first, we're going to do an intro to UX. Can I ask, who is a UX designer in their title? Who is a UI designer / UX designer / UI artist? That is fewer than I thought. That's interesting. Who does nothing to do with UX? Interesting. Hopefully, they will be fewer because you will become to realize that everything is UX. We're going to do an intro to UX. We're going to look at UX in games. We're going to talk about bringing the UX mindset. And hopefully, if I don't talk for too long, there'll be questions at the end. So, for user experience and introduction, for anyone who doesn't know, UX stands for user experience. There's a glaring mistake here, and it should be UE. Yeah. What is UX? I like to illustrate it with this quote that I annoyingly say all the time in the office after I finish my lunch. I have to go now and design some user experiences. I like this quote because I think it illustrates that, ironically, user experience design is somewhat unobviously named, right? If I said, I'm going to go and design some levels, I'm going to go and design some narrative, you might understand what I was sitting doing at my desk all day. But if I say I have to go and design some user experiences, like, what does that actually entail? Well, in its highest form, UX design is a culture of design which prioritizes the user experience. UX is a mindset that should influence all aspects of a project, and therefore it should be part of all phases of your development. And it's great to try and get it into any team that you can in your product. I noticed that I've said it's a culture of design, and what that really means is that it's a process. UX cannot be done later in the process because fundamentally it is the process. And what is that process? Well, there's lots of ways that people think about this. For example, we have design thinking, which is emphasize, design, ideate, prototype, and test. You've probably seen it before. If you don't like this one and you want to get funky with it, you can do design thinking, a non-linear process, which is empathy, test, prototype, test, learn. Or this one's in red, not blue. It's understand, research, analyze, design, launch, analyze again. Or there's this one, which is research, explore, create, validate, iteration. Or there's this one that looks like 2 diamonds, that is ask, listen, sort, create, test, design, understand, define, develop, finalize. And I'm in no way, I know I'm making fun of them, I don't mean to. They are actually very well informed and well thought out design processes. But I'm not saying that they're not useful and they're not worthwhile at all. They really are. But I'm just saying that you shouldn't get too hung up on thinking that one of them is necessarily the correct one to do and trying to stick to one too strictly in the work that you do.
You should find one that works for you, your project, your team, or adapt one to suit what you're doing. They're just different ways of thinking about the same thing, and ultimately they only exist to serve what you're trying to do. So UX is an evidence-based practice. It's something that can separate it from other design methodologies, and it derives its value from the scientific method, which we've all agreed is basically the way that you can prove how you want to do something in science. It's like your classic GCSE chemistry. So to start off, we ask a question. This is one of the best parts. It's where you're curious. Like, everything is still up for grabs. It's the shiny new like drawing sketchbook of science. Everything is still possible, and it is yet to crumble down. The second one is background research. What has already been done that can help us out and get us started? The third one is we come up with a hypothesis. We've learned a bit. We've done some background research. What do we think might happen? The fourth one, we run an experiment. We try something and see if it works. We then analyze and see if it actually did work. And the sixth step, which everyone usually likes to conveniently forget, is that you have to communicate what happened back to other people. You have to let other people know what you find out. This is a Discworld reference, if anybody is familiar. Yes, thank you. It's very tenuous. Anyway, so if we take this scientific method and we put it back next to one of the ones we looked at before, it's really easy to see how this is just a different adaptation of this. Like, we have research and explore options. We have create and try something. We have see if it worked. But this one points out this iterative step, and that is what is missing from this scientific one. You got to do stuff over and over again, because you've got to make sure that you're honing in on a pleasing solution to your problem. So everyone's familiar with the idea of iteration in this room, probably. It's just where we do processes over and over. And it means that I like to think that the most basic idea of the UX process basically becomes this. It's research something, it's make something, it's evaluate, figure out if it worked or not, and go back around again. So for a UX designer, some of the examples of these stages might look like, in your first instance, it's personas, trying to figure out who your users might be. Is figuring out your requirements, looking at competitor analysis of how people have already solved problems. The second one would be wireframing, prototyping, coming up with hypotheses, again, about what you think might happen. And the final one is evaluate. You have to see if it works. This is A/B tests, analytics, surveys. We'll go into these things a bit more later. But what is most important about this is that you have to make sure you're putting the user in the middle of it all in order to be user-centered. And how do you be user-centered? Well, if you give anyone any product, digital or not, they essentially fall into having two modes of thought that's going to cause them a problem. The first one is, how do I use this thing that you've given me? How do I get over this bridge? The second one is, I tried something. Did it work? Did it make things worse? Did it make things better? There's two fancy names for these. The first is the gulf of execution. So users have expectations about how features can be interacted with and how the elements that you've given them relate together. And frustration occurs in the first case when they don't know how to reach their goal. They don't know what to do with what you've given them. The second one is the gulf of evaluation. Once they've tried something, they need to know, is that what I wanted? You have to give them feedback for them to interpret. And the frustration occurs when users can't interpret the current state of the system. They don't know what's going on. So as I say, if you think about any problem that you ever have with a digital device, it's going to be one of these two things. You're either like, what do I do? Or you're like, what just happened? That's basically this. And you can solve it by understanding the way that people process tech. This is with human factor psychology and human-computer interaction principles. I'll go into a couple, but a key point of this talk is not for me to teach you them. There's lots and lots of great UX games resources out there to teach you this kind of thing. But I picked a couple to illustrate the point because they're sort of fun to look at. And I think it just helps to ground what I'm talking about a little bit more. So the first one would be, a UX designer might think about Gestalt principles. These are how the human mind organizes the environment. This one is called closure. You'll see a triangle there. There's actually no triangle. There's just three Pac-men, Pac people. Pac-mans, Pac people. They, again, but your mind will see a complete triangle, right? Again, proximity. This is actually only one group of rectangles, but your brain sees it as two. I haven't told you there's two groups there, but you're going to think, yeah, they're separated. They're two different sets of things. And thirdly, similarity. Again, you're going to see triangles and squares, but I haven't told you to look for it. Your brain just automatically starts organizing that environment. And if you can understand these rules, you can apply them to things like UI design, to level design, because really it's how your mind is organizing any information that you give it, even if it's not visual. The next example is Nielsen heuristics. These are rules of thumb for interaction design. What am I doing? One of the most fun ones to look at is for matches between real world and the digital world, because your brain is ultimately going to understand something if it's already familiar with it. So you follow convention to make things obvious. You know how a folder system in a PC works because it's the same as how folders work in real life, and the icon is even just a folder. We're not trying to get you to do anything new. You put stuff in it, and you can. But the difference is now you can keep going forever. Another thing is providing feelings of safety by allowing emergency exits in software, just like how we have them in real life. Apple knew when they made the iPhone originally that people needed a way to retreat out of the thing they were unfamiliar with. They needed somewhere they could always go back to, and having that familiar tactile button that was similar to on older mobile devices meant that you always felt safe in what you were doing, because if your app started crashing, you can always just back out of it back to the home screen. And thirdly, if you can reduce cognitive overload by having users recognize information rather than recall it. All of my drawings on my site and everything have me in this red hat, and then I wear it on stage. You might not remember me, but later on LinkedIn, you might see a photo of this red hat and think, oh yeah, it's the person from the talk. Another example is the goal gradient effect. The closer you are to a goal, the more motivation. You can see this in all parts of your life, specifically in games. It can affect things like monetization strategy. It can affect things like quest setting. Or for me, it affects my Waterstones coffee loyalty card. I love Waterstones. It's one of my favorite things. And because I only need 2 more stamps, I'm really excited to go and give them my money. If I only had 1 stamp, I might just go to the coffee shop that's nearest. But I'm actually not going to get to 9 stamps the next time I buy one, but I feel like I'm almost there. So I'm more likely to walk that extra way to Waterstones. And fourth, progressive disclosure. Users learn better when they're exposed gradually to things. For example, this is Sonic the Hedgehog. Look at his nice shoes. Oh, look at that boy go. Can't he roll? If I just told you this, you'd be like, what is that? But now you know it's Sonic. But the real way to be user-centered in your product is to include the users. And this means user research. Because if you're not including the user, then you're not being user-centered. Some ways that you can do this might be A and B testing, giving people 2 different versions of your product and seeing how they respond differently to it. It might be heuristic evaluation, going back to the things that were in the previous slide and being able to evaluate if you're actually hitting those core components of UX. Or interviews and surveys, just directly asking people, is this what you wanted? Is this what you expected it to do? Because like are going to go in with expectations about how a user is going to respond, but people will know that in interviews and surveys, they'll always tell you something that you weren't expecting. Doing UR can help remove the us and them, because it's no longer this abstract player or this abstract user that you're thinking about. You're actually going to see people interacting with your product. And UR is its own discipline in of itself. It can be very complicated to get it right, but any is better than none. And once you think about this, you can really begin to add value to your product with the UX mindset. So what do I mean when I say add value to your product with UX? This is the UX pyramid. There's different versions of it. I drew this one, but again, the specifics of it don't matter too much. It's a way to visualize the idea of adding value through UX. So at our bottom, we have things which are functional. It's like, well, it does the job, I guess. I hate it. I don't want to use it, but I have to use it because it does something that only this thing does. As I move up, I get to usable. I don't dread using it anymore. It's all right. It's pleasurable. It's convenient and expected. I'm going to start showing it to other people and be like, what a cool thing this is. Becomes meaningful. And then really at the top, you get to significant, which is where it's of personal note to you. And this is where your core fans are going to come from. If you can give them something that's all the way up there that becomes actually significant to them, then they're going to keep returning to your product. And they're going to advocate for your stuff. You'll see that on the left-hand side, it's sort of split into tasks and experiences. And I'll go into that a little bit more now. So when you design anything, you got to think, what are you designing for? Are you designing for an experience and a goal, or are you being strictly task-based? So a goal is a person's expectation of an end condition. It's the drivers behind their behaviors, and ultimately it relates to their motivations. So an example of a goal might be, I want to eat a tasty meal with minimum effort. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but it's something that we've all thought at one time. But a task is the steps that someone takes to achieve their desired end condition, and they change depending on what's available to them. So an example of a task to meet this goal might be, I'll open a food delivery app, one task. I'll put something in my basket and I'll pay for it. But an equally valid way to achieve this goal might be, I'll walk into another room. I will politely greet the person I live with. I will ask them to make me dinner. You've still met your goal. You've still followed a series of tasks. And they might both be satisfying to you, and they might both be for different times. And this is why this idea of change in tasks is really important. Because these goals, because they're related to what you really want, they're your drivers, they're way less likely to change over time. But a task might change depending on loads of factors that you can't control in a person's life. But if you make sure that you're really meeting their goals rather than just their tasks, they're going to keep coming back to your product over and over again. And the way that you can really understand people's goals, as I said before, is with UR. You're going to have a product that's a choice every time. It's meaningful to them. And again, you can change the tasks, but they're still going to keep coming back because your solution is holistic, it's sustainable, and it's comprehensive. And you can work backwards once you've figured out goals to derive what tasks you're going to give a user. The way that I really love to think about this is this idea that Starbucks does not sell you coffee. And there's a little frog guy. So this is getting a little bit into product design and away from UX slightly, but I just really love the concept. But I think that it's the key to making any sort of like powerful creative work. The idea that Starbucks does not sell you coffee is the idea that if you walk into a Starbucks, the thing they're selling you is not the coffee. It's not the espresso. They're selling you the feeling of you are the kind of person that likes to go into Starbucks to drink your coffee. If you really wanted the world's best cup of coffee, you wouldn't go to Starbucks, right? But you want to walk in, you want to see all the cool people working on their laptops. You want to queue up, and you don't want to say, I'll have a large. You want to say, I'll have a venti. I don't even know what that means. They'll give you a nice cup. If they handed you your coffee in a red Solo cup, you're not going back. They write your name on it. It makes you feel like you're the kind of person that's in a phase of your life where the thing that you have money to spend is on a fancy coffee experience. But the other thing is that Starbucks is consistent. You can rely on them, whichever one you walk into, to deliver you a specific thing. And this is the same for loads of people's favorite stuff. If you ask what someone's favorite musical artist is, it's not necessarily the one that they think is the best. If you meet somebody who goes to Starbucks, they don't necessarily think the coffee is the best. But it means that that level of quality is always there for them and they feel safe with it. They're selling you the feeling. And the reason why Starbucks is so good at it is because they're intentional. They know what it is that you want. And everything in that shop is designed to give you it. And sometimes the users don't even realize that that's what they want, right? They think that they want coffee, but they don't. And this is because Starbucks truly understands their customers and the users of their service. So if we go back to the UX pyramid, it becomes really easy to see how the things that you do every day, whether they're digital design or not, are going to fit on this triangle, and how you can easily see as well that that's typically where you want to spend your time. It's where you want to put your money, and it's what you want to share with other people, the things that are up here. So from examples for me, down here would be like the washing machine in my rented apartment, right? Do I understand what half the buttons on it do? No. Would I keep it if I had a choice? No, I would not. Does it make too much noise of my Fantasy Tavern ambience playlist? Yes, it does. But I have to use it because I have to do this task, and it does it in the most rudimentary way. 2 would be basically any hotel elevator / basically any elevator / lift ever, where you can't figure out where you're going or what is on any floor, right? You press a button. When is the elevator coming? I don't know. You go in. I can see myself. I like that. I can actually see myself on both sides. I don't like this. But the thing is as well, like, I don't know which floor breakfast is on. That's my goal, okay? They don't let me do it. The one outside is padded. I'm sorry, Hilton Hotel. Why is the Elevator, like a padded cell. Go and look at it. Go press the button. Homework, go press the button and look at the padded cell elevator. 3, this is my Greg's loyalty app. So Greg's is my Starbucks, right? It supports some of my true goals in life. Firstly, eat more Greg's. Secondly, it allows me to bring up the fact that I'm Northern in front of all of you. These are very scripted jokes, you can tell. Thirdly, it's actually really nicely designed. So it's easy to navigate. It does what I want. I can see my loyalty points. We've got the Waterstones thing again. I can see that I've got a nice reward. The things that I care about the most, the getting the free Greg's, is right at the top. It doesn't give me ads. It doesn't give me anything I don't want to do. It's minimalist but intentional, right? It's truly meaningful to me because my phone is always at 100% capacity, but something I have not deleted is my Greg's app. When I wrote this talk, I didn't realize I'd included 3 separate coffee shop anecdotes, but here we are. So to sum up the UX intro, UX is a process. I'm going to say this a lot. You should bridge gulfs of evaluation and execution in your work. You can't be user-centered without involving users, and you should know your users' goals to derive their tasks. So that's all well and good, but what about user experience in games, right? First off, shouldn't this be player experience? Yes, it should, but I don't have the authority to indicate, to like make this ripple effect industry-wide. So UX in games versus other applications. The role is different elsewhere in the games industry than elsewhere, than other places, and it comes back to this idea of designing for goals and tasks. And it comes back to understanding your player's journey through your product and what you're really trying to sell someone again. So if we're not in games, we'll call it a tool. You want to remove the barriers to allowing someone to do the tasks that they've got to do, because when they achieve their goal, it makes them feel good. So it's all about removing friction between these steps. It wants to be seamless. It wants to be efficient. It wants to be easy. They're extrinsically motivated. The thing that they enjoy isn't using your product necessarily. It's probably just getting to the thing it lets them do. I don't love being in Deliveroo and putting a load of food in my basket. I love when it arrives at my front door. And the thing I love about the app is it lets me do it quickly. But in games, you give them some tasks and then you achieve the goal. But like, did that feel good? Well, they're intrinsically motivated, so doing the tasks actually feels really good. The game itself is largely the reward, and if everything is too easy or too obvious, it's not fun. And this can be a big thing to learn as a new UX designer, striking this balance and communicating this balance with the rest of your team. There's a misconception that UX is about oversimplifying gameplay or dumbing it down, but it's not. It's about making sure users are getting the emotions that you want from them at the right time so that they stick around. UX is about making sure that the frustration is in the right places, and sometimes you actually want some. UX can provide that psychological understanding of how to get this balance where you want it. So if we go back to our UX pyramid, the things at the top become so much more broad because, again, your player's journey is much more likely to have these peaks and troughs of feeling in it. I'm not going to pick into examples here too much, but one of my favorite games ever is Unpacking by Witchbeam. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it, and I consider it a very good example of user experience in games. So it's easy to navigate, it's intuitive, it has great heuristic wins, a lot of them down to core decisions like the fact that the gameplay is a very well done metaphor for an existing experience. So you come to it and you ultimately already know how all the mechanics work because everybody's unpacked things in life. But it's used to deliver a really well woven narrative. And I could focus for a long time about everything on this in this game. I love it. But I want to focus down on this sock drawer. So in the game, you go through a series of levels in different houses, and you have to unpack your belongings into each one, and you learn about the character based on their belongings, who they live with, things like that. It's really phenomenal, as I say. You should check it out. But in every house, you have to unpack this sock drawer, and I hate it. It takes so long. Half the socks are in the wrong box. Like, you think you've done it, and there's more. You have to put them all individually. Sometimes you put them in a way that doesn't fit, and you have to reopen the drawer and take a lot of them out and rearrange it and put it back in, right? But that's not bad user experience. That's not a usability problem. But like, if you were in traditional UX, you would say that's friction. Right? The player doesn't want to do that. But actually, no, it's delivering the narrative to me because that feels just what I feel like having to put my laundry away every day with my broken washing machine. And hopefully, and another thing that example did was illustrate the fact that UX is not UI. This is a very contentious point within the UX community, but really they have different priorities, and UX can work to serve UI, but this is just like how UX can serve other disciplines. So one place this idea comes from is the role of a UX designer in other cases where applications are consisting entirely of a task-based 2D interface. So this means that all your solutions basically have to be done through this UI because it's what you've got to work with. Maybe you've got some ear cons or some audio feedback, maybe the phone buzzes, but a lot of it, you've got this to play with, right? And it also means that the people who started to get interested in UX in the first place were the UI artists, because they were the ones with the feedback on their desks saying people can't do it, they don't know what they're doing. And this can cause annoyance and frustration for some people because it leads people to think that UX is mainly about visual design, but no amount of good UI can fix a broken system. So UX should not depend on UI as the ruling solution for all of your player needs. So if UX isn't UI, what is it? Again, sorry, warning for moving content for motion sickness on the screen. This is some gameplay from AC Mirage, which I've screen capped from our recent Ubisoft Forward. I've never worked on this project, but I thought it made for some nice context coincidentally. So if UX isn't UI, then what is it? Well, firstly, it's everything you visually perceive, and what do you expect from it? Like, why do those guys have a white outline around them? What is that telling me? What is the, wait till he goes. Go quicker, go quicker. What does the blur around the screen mean? Does it mean that I'm hidden? I don't know. Another thing, your sense of achievement, it's your rewards and satisfaction. It's your controlling mappings and what physical metaphors you're doing with your hands in the way that you interact and how that mirrors the character on the screen and how that impacts your immersion. It's your difficulty onboarding and your learning curves. And a great rule for this is minutes to learn, but a lifetime to master. Something that's really great at this is Rocket League. You can play Rocket League with almost anyone. You can hand them it and they can have a good time, but the people who are really good at it take ages to hone in on that skill, and that's really good UX. It's immersion in your worlds, it's surprises, autonomy, and escapism, and it's accessibility. And I would just like to take a second to say that as a UX designer, or as any designer, but especially a UX designer, accessibility is not 100% part of your responsibility. It's not extra work. You're not cutting corners if you are cutting corners if you're not considering it as part of your role. Different players have different barriers, and when we get to play and share in this thing we all love so much, then everybody wins. So it's so much more. So UX is not UI. What is it? Again, it's at its heart, UX games is about identifying problems that prevent players from fully engaging with and enjoying your game. It's about understanding these problems, and then it's about proposing solutions to them. So for a summary for UX in games, games are intrinsically motivated, and the relationship between goals and tasks is more complicated. There's a difference between a usability problem and intended friction, and you should understand the difference between UI and UX. So now that you all really want to be UX designers, how can you bring the UX mindset to your team? The first thing to say is that you should understand where your team is at now. And this looks very scary and professional. It's the UX maturity model. This is the reference if you want to Google it afterwards. But it's basically a nice way of summarizing the different stages that your team can be at. So at first, you're at level 1. Your UX is unintentional, it's misunderstood, and it's being ignored by people. You're facing unawareness or rejection. And your answer to this basically is training. You need somebody on the team to fully understand what UX is all about. At level 2, UX is in the discourse. So people might say things about, oh, we need to make sure we put the player first, or we need to ensure usability. But the approach isn't established, and they don't really know how to achieve those things. So your barriers here are your time, your cost, and your resources in investing in it as a discipline. And your tools to progress is usability testing. This is a really low-hanging fruit to just show people that, that there's really simple things you can solve by being user-centered. At level 3, you have an expert on the team. So there's some techniques there, but your testing might feel loose and it doesn't have a concrete objective, or maybe your role is being done by somebody who doesn't have enough experience in human factor psychology, or they have little training in UX. But it's there and everybody's trying, which is great. But your barriers are formalization and expansion, and your tools to progress is that you have to try and spread this throughout your team more. which takes you to 4. You're at a centralized UX level. It's in the processes. It's part of your production cycles, but you still don't have a dedicated budget for it. So you're facing scalability issues. And your tools to progress is to try and get your company to basically tie UX into your KPIs. But this means that you get to level 5, which is where you have a distributed UX culture. And it's worth saying that no company in the world is here, right? And it's somewhat unachievable because the idea of being here means that you're valuing your user experience of your product over its ability to make money, which, you know, you're going to think like that's never going to happen. But I don't think that that mindset is the right way to think about it. As a UX designer, this should still be what you're striving for. It should still be about putting the user first and getting something that they just really love at the end of the day. And I think it's sort of sad that this seems so improbable. So here is the model altogether. I'll leave it if anybody wants to take a photo. Again, the reference is at the bottom, or I can give you after. But you should know that your project will likely have different levels of UX maturity throughout the disciplines, within the inner teams of your structure, and probably at different points within your production timeline as well. Because UX can seem like a big investment if you haven't done it before, it means that it can fall aside when you are at tight deadlines or something. And this is something that you just have to work out and figure out how to do it within your company. But if this has got you excited about how great your game's going to be with your new UX team, you should know that if you think you can just install an out-of-the-box UX team, it won't work, unfortunately. Sometimes UX can feel like you're just throwing rocks at people to try and get them to listen to you. And this is because people can be precious about existing process, and it makes sense that they are. And they can think that they're already being user-centered because at the end of the day, everybody knows that somebody else is going to play the game. But they have this abstract idea of who the players are. And a lot of UX is trying to humanize these people to them. But really, real UX design comes from having intentional practice. So my tips are, don't descend from above and make progress visible. So don't descend from above means that UX is as much about relationships as it is about solutions. You should try and get people on your side and then know who you can depend on and start there to prove value outwards to other people. It's not about getting everybody at once. Sometimes it's just about having your champions every now and then. And you should create resources which allow others to help out. And it makes it easier to get other people on board. Sometimes if you come in trying to do UX, it can feel like you're on a high horse that has this way more like spiritual and serving way of trying to design stuff. But really, a lot of UX is just about teaching people the vocabulary and getting them to understand that they're probably already doing it. It just needs to be more intentional. So you should make your progress visible. You should start small. Maybe take one component of a game that maybe like a play test that's just casual directors sitting around and playing the build, but they know they've found a problem with a certain part of the game. And you should show how you could take this small component and by being intentional with your UX, that you can improve things. You should manage expectations to what you can deliver, though, because if you say that you can solve every problem in the game, then you're doomed to always underdeliver. So you should be realistic about what you can improve with the resources that you have. And thirdly, you can have your area of strength, but you should practice saying that you need to go away and research something and then come back. In the long run, it'll actually save you time over uninformed iterations. And although it is design, UX can be a lot less about intuition in nature. Sometimes you have great sparks, and the more and more that you learn about UX psychology, you're going to have these more often. But part of your value is this research ability. So you should own the fact in saying that you're going to have to go away and come back with something and not give everybody an answer in that meeting there and then. So what makes a good UX designer? We'll start off with the soft skills. I don't really like the term soft skills, but everybody knows what it means. So the first is collaboration. You need to understand other disciplines, the impacts on them, constraints, what priorities they're under. You need to be able to explain to non-specialists, and you need to provide meaningful, tailored feedback that isn't just copy and pasting heuristics to them and them not knowing what they should do with that information that you've given them. You need to be resilient. So anyone who's ever play tested their work knows that it can be painful to see that one of your designs is not received well by players, that it's unusable. But you need to be resilient in this face of change. And also, This is the logo for an American UX company who I've never worked with, but I met them when I was over there, and they're very nice. They gave me this logo on a sticker. But I think that this, if you are a UX designer, you will relate to this probably and know what it means. It can take a lot to try and incorporate UX somewhere, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of resilience to change practice and process, but that's part of what it is. Empathy, you're going to work with, you're going to design for players who aren't like yourself, whether by taste, skill, or ability. It's like anything in design, you need to be able to separate your own taste from what it is that the user wants. And you're also going to work with people that are unlike you. So you need to be empathetic, again, to what their priorities are and what constraints they're under. The technical skills, you need to be able to dissect and decipher information. So you're going to be given a lot of success criteria for briefs, or sometimes not even a brief entirely. You'll just be sort of told, go and try and fix this thing that we don't really know what it is or what the problem is. But you need to see what's most important for a player in this situation. What's the problem that they're actually having here? Because sometimes, as with the Starbucks thing, they don't know themselves. It's not on the surface. You've got to try and figure out what it is. Abstraction, you need to create concepts, designs which encapsulate the highest priority information by removing information from unimportant aspects. A lot of people in design, myself included, can feel that when you've designed this whole great feature or something, that it all needs to be player facing, because to you it's all important. You can't see the wood for the trees. But part of UX is being able to understand and communicate to people that maybe some of it is less important for the person who's there and they need to be focused on something else. And theory, you need to, it's an evidence-based practice. You need to learn HCI theory and principles to inform your design work. But what really makes a good UX designer, if you don't have one already, is someone wanting to learn. Yeah, thanks. Because as I said at the beginning, UX cannot be done later in the process because fundamentally it is a process. And if you realize UX as a process, you can incorporate user-centered approaches in your work and therefore practice UX in your team. And we're at the end, but before we finish, I just want to take a moment and say that I know that showing the scientific method and talking about product design and UX maturity can feel wrong in games sometimes, because we want to be wholly creative and we want to run with the happy accidents and let our internal drive just make the cool stuff lead the way. And I don't ever mean to make UX seem like it's detracting from that. Making stuff that resonates with other people is one of the best things about being a human on this earth. And by chucking this information to you, I don't mean to try and take that magic by saying that you need to do certain processes a certain way or be focused really on getting the most out of people and manipulating them into really loving your product. I don't mean to take that magic. You're always going to have unpredictability. We all know that about the games. But I'm guessing if you're at this talk, then you're already in games and you're already down for all of that. You love the magic, you're sold on it. That's your personal journey. I can't tell you about that. But by being user-centered, you can understand more about how to deliver what you really want to resonate with other people and give them truly valuable experiences. Thank you. Thank you. There's some places to go next. This top one is if you feel like you are starting from complete scratch and you don't know where to go with UX. This one is maybe if you're in the games industry already and you just want to know some more about how this can apply to you. And this one is probably if you are a UX designer and you want to know more about other people that are doing what you do, doing it well, failing at it well, and communicating back how they failed well. And thank you very much to the audio staff and the red shirt people.
We've got a few minutes for questions if everyone wants to put their hands up in the air.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hi, thank you. That was really interesting.
Thank
you
you.
are also a fantastic public speaker.
I feel a bit like an excited puppy, actually.
Both things can be true. This is a topic of conversation in our studio that we've been having for a little while now. Whether or not, I don't think it's a question that we need someone who knows user experience better than we do. I'm really curious to know, as a specialist UX designer, how do you fit into the overall workflow of designing a feature or a mechanic, or like what does that look like with the other parts of the design process?
Okay, cool. So I can talk about this a little bit at UB. There was some stuff on it. This talk was like an hour long, and I've cut it down. But it obviously depends on how your team's going to work. But currently, we sit as our own UX team, but we are in with the game design team and the UI team. And if something I'm striving to do is be more in with like narrative, audio, and level as well. But this is just because, as I say, we're 2 years in, we're establishing and trying to figure it out as well. But basically, when a game designer makes a feature, we would be involved in any part of that is considered player-facing, or we should be. But again, a problem is that there's only 3 of us on our design team, and we're making a really big product, right? But this is things like, we know how this whole mechanic's going to work, but in what order do we introduce this to people? How do we get them to understand that this is going to work? It's things like in what priority is this information for them? We do information architecture and stuff, but there's also some parts of the game that we are feature owners for. For example, I'm the feature owner for the accessibility features on the game because it's considered in the UX mandate. And there's other parts that are, maybe they're areas of UI, or maybe they are areas of the game where we are actually the feature owner for them because they're considered to just be entirely about trying to get the player to understand everything that's going on in the back end. So we sit primarily within game design, but I'm not sure that this is necessarily the best way for it, but it works for us at the moment where we're at on the project. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Chloe.
Hello.
Thought you did such a good job up.
Thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about accessibility as in the position you're in. I was talking with a charity, I think it's just a community group at the Festival of Food. Long live the Festival of Food. May it rain
Pretty good
over all events. I was talking with a blind community group, or kind of partially sighted, and they're trying to increase engagement in companies with kind of accessibility features. And they were talking about The Last of Us Remake, The Last of Us 2, and their accessibility features. I thought it'd be interesting to ask you about when we're thinking about open world game design, how do we make decisions around UX for big open worlds where you can choose to do a million things?
Cool. So one of the great things about open world game design is that people can just play the bits that are enticing to them and potentially leave other bits, right? And a big part of that idea is accessibility by design. So accessibility is not just the settings at the beginning of the boot screen or at the end of your settings menu about, I want to change the color of this, I want to put subtitles on. If you are making, particularly an open world game, but really any game, if you can weave accessibility into your design, then it means that you don't need those options. If you know that there is a part of your game that requires quite dexterous hand movements, for example, to do a timed interaction or something, if you have something in your game, an item, a weapon, a different way around that level that means they can avoid that, that's still accessible design. And open worlds provide you a really good avenue for, allowing these different branches to basically be accessibility options, but they're not seen as that. They're not put in this special place in the menu that are just for people who need the accessibility options. And also something about, especially in large companies, is that you really need to stay on top of what's going on in the accessibility community, because people look at things like The Last of Us 2, which is fantastic, right? But it came out a little while ago now. If you're starting a project now and you're shipping in however many years, you don't got to benchmark The Last of Us. You got to think, what problems does our game have that in so many years people are going to expect to have solutions for? Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. Are we good? Are there more questions? Don't know what time it is.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the talk. It was really inspiring.
Thank you.
My question is, do you have any tips on like balancing UX and difficulty in games?
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard.
Because that seems like the main difference between like UX normally and UX in games, right? Like Starbucks doesn't want to make it difficult to buy a coffee, but in a game you might add a couple of obstacles.
Yeah, so I think it's all to do with that idea of what emotion are you trying to give somebody, and understanding if you're giving them it at a pacing point that's going to keep them sticking around and that they're going to understand that's what you're trying to do. If you are giving someone a menu that is inaccessible to them, then that is not like difficulty, right? I just hate that. But if I am so many hours into a game and it's starting to get difficult, or I understand in the branding of this game and the pitching of this game that it's about repetition and getting better and better, then I'm gonna see it as a challenge, and I need to see that I will get there eventually, and that it is what I'm meant to be feeling. It's not that I am just not good enough. But we're at time, but I can talk to you more about it if you want afterwards, or my thingy is here.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.